From He-Man's hypermuscular body and secret identity as Prince Adam, to Jem's double life as a glam pop star, and the Smurfs' extremely flashy Vanity Smurf. 1980s cartoons are often remembered today as LGBT coded through identity swaps, performance, and exaggerated style. Stay with me, because the final entry is a band Pilot Network's buried forever, The Smurfs. The Smurfs aired as a Saturday morning cartoon in the United States from the year 1981 to the year 1989. It followed a hidden village of small blue creatures who lived in mushroom houses and were almost entirely male. The show lands on this list because fans and critics have long read one of those little creatures, Vanity Smurf, as a gay-coded character. Vanity Smurf was one of the easiest members of the village to pick out of a crowd. He wore a single bright flower tucked into the front of his white cap at all times. He also carried a small oval hand mirror almost everywhere he went, and he checked it often. Most Smurfs were named for a simple job or a single trait, like Handy, Brainy, Grouchy, or Greedy. Vanity was named only for his deep and constant focus on his own good looks. That name pointed viewers toward one reading of the character before he ever spoke a line of dialogue. The design of the wider village is a big part of why this show gets grouped onto lists like this one. For most of the long run, the Smurfs were shown as an all-male society with no wives and no mothers. There was a single adult female named Smurfette, and the writers of the show created her on purpose within the story. In the cartoon, the evil wizard Gargamel first built Smurfette out of clay to trick and destroy the other Smurfs. Papa Smurf later used his own magic to change her from a trick into a real and accepted Smurf. For years, the choice to drop one female into a world of males fed jokes and quiet questions about the whole group. Vanity stood apart from those jokes mostly because of the way he behaved, not just the way he looked. He preened in front of any surface that reflected him, and he fussed over every small flaw in his appearance. Those habits lined up neatly with an old and very tired stereotype of the vain and effeminate man. That stereotype is worth naming out loud, so the coding is clear to everyone watching. In much of 20th century film and television, vanity in a male character was quietly used as a kind of code. It signaled softness, difference, and often a hidden gay identity, all without the story ever saying the actual word. The Smurfs did not invent that code at all, because the code was already decades old by then. But because the cartoon reached tens of millions of children around the world, the old code reached them too. Children did not need the word or the theory to sense that vanity simply was not quite like the others. One specific detail became the fixed point that almost every later discussion of the character returns to. In several screen adaptations, Vanity is shown leaning in and kissing his own reflection in his little mirror. That single image of self-love is the record fans point to first when they call him the coded Smurf. At the time the show aired, almost no parent wrote in to complain about Vanity Smurf in particular. The complaints about the Smurfs in the 1980s were aimed at completely different targets instead. People argued about the magic, the heavy toy marketing, and even wild false rumors, never about queer coding. The queer reading of Vanity arrived much later, mostly online, and mostly from grown adults looking back. They studied the flower, the mirror, and the endless fussing with fresh and older eyes. Many of them recognized a pattern they had missed, or could not name as children. This is the beating heart of the entire list, and Vanity shows it to us very early. There was no open or positive gay character in a mainstream Western kids cartoon in that decade, so audiences learned to find meaning in coding, in small hints, and in characters who simply felt familiar to them. Vanity also sits inside a larger and stranger idea about the shape of the Smurf village itself. Some writers have described it as a tiny world with no real romance and no clear rules about gender at all. In that reading, the whole village becomes a soft and coded space, not just the one flower-wearing Smurf. It is important to be fully honest about the hard limits of this first entry. The people who made the Smurfs never once said that Vanity was meant to be gay. This entry rests entirely on design, behavior, and decades of audience reading, and not on any real confirmation. That honesty is exactly why Vanity opens the countdown instead of closing it near the top. He is the clearest early example of coding that exists without a shred of proof behind it. He shows the precise pattern that the far stronger and better documented entries will build on later. There is one more gentle layer to the character that a lot of people tend to miss. Vanity was never treated inside the story as a villain or a punchline who deserved to be punished. He was simply one part of the group, Flower and Mirror and all, which was genuinely rare for a coded figure then. Most coded characters in that whole era were written as villains or as silly figures of fun. Vanity quietly broke that mold in a very small way, simply by belonging to the hero's side. He was vain and fussy, yes, but he was still counted as a full Smurf like every one of the others. That small measure of acceptance is a real part of why so many fans still hold on to him today. He was not mocked or hated inside his own story for being different from the crowd around him. For a coded character living in the 1980s, that quiet acceptance was almost tender. So one clear question hangs in the air as we step away from the Mushroom Village. If a vain little Smurf with a flower could carry this much coded meaning, then what about a whole world of it? What about a cartoon where nearly every single hero was built like a bodybuilder and dressed in almost nothing at all? The Smurfs hid their coding inside one small, mirror-loving member of a peaceful blue village. The next show hid its coding somewhere far less expected, deep inside a hard and violent military war cartoon. At number 19, the toughest soldiers on all of television shared the screen with some of the campest villains of the whole decade. G.I. Joe, a real American hero. G.I. Joe, a real American hero, ran as a daily cartoon from the year 1983 to the year 1986. On the surface, it was the most aggressively masculine show of the entire decade, built around soldiers, guns, and war machines. It fits this list because its villains, and not its heroes, were the figures that later got read as camp and coded. The heroes were a large team of elite soldiers who fought a global terrorist group known as Cobra. The show existed to sell a massive line of action figures, play sets, and plastic military vehicles. It was built from the ground up to move toys, and nearly every character existed to be bought in a store. The Joes themselves were plain, rugged, and interchangeable by careful design. They spoke in clipped, serious voices, followed orders, and rarely showed any feeling beyond duty. There was very little room for softness among the heroes, which is exactly what makes the villains stand out. Cobra was the place where the show suddenly got strange, loud, and deeply theatrical. The villains wore hoods, capes, snake symbols, and dramatic costumes that no real soldier would ever wear. They gave long, hammy speeches and struck grand, sweeping poses that the plain heroes never once attempted. That wide gap between the two sides is exactly where the coding quietly lives. In many older cartoons, the flamboyant and theatrical figure was the villain, while the plain and manly figure was the hero. G.I. Joe followed that unwritten rule almost perfectly, week after week, and sharp-eyed fans eventually noticed it. Cobra Commander was by far the clearest and loudest case of this whole pattern. He hid his entire face behind either a cloth hood or a smooth, mirrored battle mask. He was vain, dramatic, and quick to shriek, which set him far apart from the calm and steady soldiers. The animated movie released in the year 1987 pushed all of this even further than the series did. It introduced a hidden snake kingdom called Cobra Law and a strange snake-born ruler named Serpentor. The villains grew stranger, more ornate, and more theatrical than anything the weekly show had dared to try. In that same movie, the lead villain slowly and grotesquely transforms into a giant snake before the audience. The designs of the villain world were lush and bizarre, a world away from the plain military look of the Joes. The whole enemy kingdom felt like a different, far more flamboyant show, hiding quietly inside the war cartoon. None of this was ever called gay on screen, and by the rules of that decade, it never could be. But the deep pattern of the theatrical, over-the-top villain was already an old and familiar code. Audiences trained on that code read Cobra as camp long before the internet ever gathered to say so out loud. The show is also remembered for one very specific and famous closing format in every episode. Each story ended with a short public safety lesson and the cheerful catchphrase, "Knowing is half the battle." That earnest little tag sat oddly beside the wild operatic villains, and fans still joke warmly about the contrast. The general public of the 1980s did not sit down and read Cobra as secretly queer. Parents of the day worried mostly about war toys and cartoon violence, and never about camp or coding. The coded reading, exactly as with the Smurfs, arrived from grown adults looking back many years later. Those adults saw clearly what the culture of the era had trained a younger audience to miss. The plain silent hero and the fabulous theatrical villain were a script as old as film itself. G.I. Joe ran that ancient script with a completely straight face in nearly every single episode. It is worth being very clear here about what this entry is and, just as importantly, what it is not. No creator ever stepped forward to confirm any Cobra villain as a gay character in any way. This entry rests only on the long camp tradition of the theatrical villain, and not on any real statement. Even so, the reading carries real weight precisely because the whole show was pushed to such an extreme. The more relentlessly macho the heroes were written, the more the strange villains stood out against them. The sheer contrast did the coding work all on its own, without needing a single spoken word of confirmation. There is a much quieter detail sitting underneath all of the loud villain theatrics. The Joes almost never had a romance, a family, or a home life shown anywhere on screen. The whole show was a closed world of men and machines, with tender feelings kept far away from view. That flatness of emotion among the heroes is a real part of the coded reading too. When a story strips romance and softness away from its heroes, that softness tends to leak into its villains. Cobra quietly became the one place in the show where drama, vanity, and real feeling were finally allowed to live. So the coding in this cartoon actually works in two opposite directions at the very same time. The heroes were coded as hard, plain, closed off, and completely without inner life. The villains were coded as vain, dramatic, and wide open, and that is exactly where the camp took root. This is the strange reason a hard war cartoon sits comfortably on a list about queer coding at all. It is not because anyone ever seriously believed the soldiers themselves were secretly gay men. It is because the show split toughness and drama so sharply that all the drama ended up looking coded. That split raises a much sharper question as we begin to climb higher up the list. If coding could hide inside a hard war cartoon almost entirely by accident, could it ever be placed there on purpose? Could a real creator have actually meant it all along? And could that creator ever have said so out loud? G.I. Joe hid its camp inside a set of villains that almost no viewer would ever rush to defend. The next show did something that no other cartoon anywhere on this entire list ever quite managed to do. At number 18, the very man who made it looked back years later and confirmed the coding with his own plain words. Super Ted. Super Ted was a Welsh animated series that aired from the year 1983 to the year 1986. It followed a discarded teddy bear who was given superpowers by a spotted alien named Spotty from outer space. It earns a special place here because one of its characters is the only figure on this whole list confirmed as gay by the person who created him. That character was the show's recurring villain, and his name was simply Skeleton. He was a walking, talking human skeleton who worked as a bumbling henchman for a bigger villain named Texas Pete. He was designed to be frightening on paper, yet he was written as cowardly, nervous, and endlessly fussy instead. In the year 2014, the show's creator Mike Young spoke openly about Skeleton during talks to revive the series. He described the long-running character in that discussion as being flamboyantly gay. That single short phrase makes Skeleton the rare 1980s cartoon figure with open, direct confirmation from his own maker. The confirmation is what makes this entry so unusual against everything else on the list. Almost every other cartoon here rests only on reading, guesswork, and years of audience interpretation. Skeleton instead rests on the direct and recorded words of the very man who created him. Skeleton looked the part of a coded villain from the top of his skull to the tips of his toes. He wore soft pink slippers on his bony feet and pulled blue gloves over his bare white hands. His overall look was fussy, delicate, and gentle rather than menacing, scary, or the least bit fearsome. His behavior on screen matched his soft appearance in almost every single scene he appeared in. He spoke with a clear lisp and moved his thin body in a nervous, fluttering, effeminate way. He was easily frightened by nearly everything and often fled from danger rather than ever causing any himself. The writers gave him small, recurring habits that pushed the coding even further into the open. He was shown taking, wearing, or fussing over various items that the show clearly linked with women. Those specific choices were a very common visual shorthand for a coded character all across that era. There is also a sly joke built directly into the whole basic idea of the character. A gay character who happens to be a literal walking skeleton quietly becomes a living, breathing pun. He is, in the very oldest sense of the phrase, a real skeleton hiding inside a closet. That buried pun is a big part of why so many fans and writers keep pointing straight at him. The coding is not only in his soft voice, his pink slippers, or his nervous little walk. It is baked right into the core concept of the character himself before he even moves or speaks. Skeleton fits a pattern that this list keeps circling back to again and again. The coded character in that decade was almost always the villain, and almost never the shining hero. He was only allowed to be soft, fussy, and different because he was also written as the bad guy. That pattern was the quiet, unwritten rule of the whole era of children's animation. Softness and difference were allowed on screen only if they were safely punished or clearly laughed at. Skeleton was both a threat and a running joke at once, which is what made his coding safe to broadcast. Because the show was Welsh and British, Skeleton reached a slightly different audience than the American cartoons. He sat inside a camp comic tradition that had run very deep in British entertainment for generations. That long tradition made his fussy, theatrical, over-the-top style feel completely normal to local child viewers. Even so, the children watching Super Ted did not sit and think about any of this while it aired. They simply saw a silly, scared skeleton who lost again and again to a brave and heroic flying bear. The coded meaning of the character sat quietly underneath all of the slapstick chases and pratfalls. That buried meaning only fully surfaced years later, once the creator finally chose to speak about it. The moment Mike Young said the plain words out loud, the long-running reading stopped being a mere guess. Skeleton moved from merely suspected to fully confirmed in the space of a single published interview. This is exactly why Skeleton is placed so early on the list, yet still treated with so much weight. He alone proves that the whole premise of this video is not just wishful reading or modern projection. At least one time in one show, an 80s cartoon really did carry a gay character fully on purpose. It is also quietly telling that the one confirmed character on the whole list is a villain. Heroes simply could not be coded this openly, or this safely anywhere in that entire decade. The single place a creator could hide a gay character was in the body of the comic bad guy. There is a genuinely bittersweet edge to that particular fact when you sit with it for a moment. The very first confirmed gay figure from this era is a lisping, cowardly, fussy skeleton who loses every week. He is real representation and a tired old stereotype rolled into the exact same bony character at once. Fans of the show tend to hold both of those truths in their hands at the very same time. They celebrate Skeleton warmly as a genuinely rare confirmed queer character from a decade that had almost none. They also clearly see the worn old jokes and stereotypes that made his existence possible in the first place. So Skeleton leaves us with a strange and pointed thought as we continue climbing up the list. If the single clearest confirmed case is a fussy, frightened villain, then where exactly did the heroes hide their coding? What happens when the coded body is not a nervous joke at all, but a powerful champion built entirely for battle? Skeleton wore his coding in pink slippers and a lisp, and remarkably, the man who made him admitted it. The next show buried its own coding in something far more physical, muscular, and impossible to look away from. At number 17, a whole team of cat warriors turned the male body itself into the loudest talking point of all. Thundercats. Thundercats aired from the year 1985 to the year 1989, and it looked like nothing else on the schedule. It followed a small band of cat warriors who fled their dying home world and crash-landed on a strange new planet called Third Earth. It fits this list because the show turned the male body into its main attraction, and fans have read those bodies as coded ever since. The young hero was named Lion-O, and the design of his body set the tone for the entire cast. He was drawn with a wild orange mane of hair, a fully bare chest, and a very tight, revealing blue outfit. Almost every male warrior on the team shared that same sleek, muscular, and barely dressed physical look. The cat theme gave the artists a built-in reason to make the bodies smooth, lean, and endlessly cat-like. The heroes moved with a slink and a stretch that often felt closer to a dance than to a fight. That soft, flowing kind of motion was genuinely rare in a decade full of stiff and blocky action heroes. The thesis of this entry is simple, and it is entirely physical rather than hidden in the plot. The show spent so much loving, careful detail on the male form that the male form quietly became the point. Gay male viewers, in particular, later admitted that those glistening cartoon bodies were an early and confusing spark. Panthro was the team's strongman, drawn broad and powerful, and very often shown with his chest fully bare. Tigra was the lean and thoughtful one, carrying himself with a calm, quiet confidence in nearly every scene. Together, the male warriors looked less like a rough military squad and more like a gallery of idealized men. There was one central female warrior, Chitara, and she was written as fast, brave, wise, and capable. But the true emotional heart of the whole show sat mostly in the space between the male characters. Their fierce loyalty, their playful teasing, and their deep care for one another drove nearly every single story. That closeness between the male leads is a large part of the coded reading that grew up around the show. They lived together, fought together, mourned together, and leaned on each other completely for survival. In a world with almost no romance to speak of, that male bond became the strongest feeling on the screen. Lion-O carried one more twist in his story that quietly deepened all of the subtext around him. His body aged rapidly into that of a grown man during the long frozen escape from his dying home world. So he was a frightened child mind trapped inside a hyper-muscular adult body, unsure of who he really was. That exact idea of a hidden, mismatched inner self runs like a thread through this entire list. A young soul locked inside a powerful body that strangers react to is a quiet and painful metaphor for not fitting in. Many viewers who felt different or out of place as children saw a real piece of themselves inside that gap. The main villain, an ancient mummy named Mum-Ra, played the exact opposite role in the same visual game. He was a shriveled, decaying creature who transformed into a towering, oiled, and heavily muscled dark warrior. His dramatic change echoed the hero's own, turning the entire show into a story about bodies, power, and reveals. The show is one of many that fans and critics return to in queer coding discussions of the decade. The conversation is very rarely about one specific line of dialogue or one single scene from an episode. It is about the overall feeling of a lush, body-focused, and deeply male-centered fantasy world. At the time it first aired, most children simply watched Thundercats for the swords and the monsters. They wanted the glowing Sword of Omens and the flashing signal eye that shone out from the top of Cat's lair. The coding, exactly as always, only became clear to many of those children years and years down the road. Honesty is owed here, as it is with every single entry that appears anywhere on this list. No one on the Thundercats creative team ever announced any hidden gay meaning inside the show. The reading grows entirely out of the design, the graceful motion, and the deep male bonds, not from a statement. Even so, the design choices the team made were genuinely bold and unusual for their particular day. Very few action cartoons dressed their male heroes in so little cloth and then lingered on them for so long. That single choice set the show apart from its peers and quietly fed decades of fond and coded memory. The cat-like animation style also softened many of the usual hard edges of the action genre itself. The heroes purred, stretched, arched, and moved with a strange kind of grace in between all the fighting. Grace was simply not a common word for 80s action, which is exactly why the show stood out so sharply. There is a quieter and less discussed point buried inside the basic setup of the group. The Thundercats were a chosen family, violently cut off from everyone and everything they had ever known. They built an entirely new home together from nothing, and that theme of found family runs very deep in queer stories. Found family is a phrase that comes up over and over again in these particular discussions. People who feel unwelcome in the world they were born into very often go and build a new one of their own. The cats did precisely that on a strange planet, and the quiet warmth of it still lands with viewers today. So Thundercats quietly offers coding of the body and coding of the heart at one and the same time. The idealized male bodies drew and held the eye, while the fierce, tender bonds held the whole story together. Both of those things became lasting reasons the show is remembered now as something quietly and fondly queer. That leaves a very natural question waiting for us as we keep climbing higher up the list. If a fierce action cartoon could feel this soft, this graceful, and this close, then what about a show built on softness from the start? What about a whole world with no real war in it at all? Made only of feelings, clouds, and endless care. Thundercats coded its meaning into muscle, into graceful motion, and into unbreakable loyalty between men. The next show threw every bit of that out and coded its meaning into something far gentler and far pinker instead. At number 16, a whole team of pastel bears turned the simple act of caring into an actual superpower. Care Bears. Care Bears began life as greeting card art before growing into a television series that ran from the year 1985 to the year 1988. It followed a group of soft, colorful bears who lived high up in the clouds and looked after the feelings of children below. It fits this list because it built a gentle, feelings-first world that rejected the tough guy rules of the decade, and queer viewers later found real comfort in it. Each individual bear wore a small picture on its round belly. That showed off its special job. There was a bear for cheer, a bear for wishes, a bear for bedtime, a bear for good luck, and many more. Their entire reason to exist in the story was to notice human emotions and then gently help with them. That deep focus on emotion was the complete opposite of nearly every action cartoon of the era. While the other big shows sold war machines, laser guns, and swords, the Care Bears sold pure kindness. In a loud decade of hard-jawed heroes, a whole team whose only weapon was caring stood out very sharply. The bears even fought their battles with warm feeling, instead of with any kind of force or violence. Their main power was the Care Bear stare, a shared beam of light and love that shot from their glowing bellies. They defeated sadness, loneliness, and cruelty simply by caring harder and never by punching anything at all. The thesis of this entry is really about contrast, and it turns out to be a surprisingly strong one. Boys in the 1980s were told loudly and often to be tough, silent, hard, and unbothered. Care Bears offered the exact reverse. A world where softness won every time. And that world drew in the kids who did not fit. The overall look of the show matched its tender heart in every single frame of animation. Everything on screen was rounded, pastel, plush, and warm, with rainbows and stars scattered across the sky. There was no real room for grit or menace anywhere in that cloud world, and that gentleness was entirely the point. The villains of the show fit the pattern too, only turned completely upside down. The bad guys were usually cold, gray, sour, and cruel, and their goal was to stamp out every warm feeling. Their whole aim was to make the world uncaring, which quietly made the simple act of caring into the heroic one. For a child who felt far too sensitive for the other rough cartoons, this show was a genuinely rare home. Care Bears insisted over and over that having big feelings was a source of strength and never a weakness. That single message reached a lot of children who were being told the exact opposite in almost every other place. Grown queer viewers later looked back on that message with a great deal of real and lasting fondness. Many of them had once been the soft, sensitive child, living in a world that pushed hardness and toughness. They found in these gentle bears an early comfort that other cartoons of the day never once offered them. The show is very often grouped together with the other soft and colorful cartoons in these discussions. It sits comfortably beside the shows built on rainbows, on close friendship, and on gentle magical worlds. Together they formed one soft corner of 80s television that queer audiences later claimed proudly as their own. It is important to be completely fair here about the real intent behind the show. No one made Care Bears in order to be a gay show, and not a single character was ever written as queer. This entry is about the tone, the comfort, and the audience, who chose to embrace it long after it first aired. But the tone of a show can matter every bit as much as any of its actual text. A world that firmly says, softness is good, and that feelings are a strength, sends a very clear and lasting signal. That signal reached the exact children who most needed to hear it. Whatever the makers may have intended, there is a lesser-known layer hidden in the way the show chose to handle its conflicts. The bears very rarely won by defeating a person completely or by driving an enemy away for good. They usually tried instead to change a heart, to reach the lonely or the hurt person behind all the cruelty. That deep belief in reaching people rather than crushing them is a genuinely gentle and unusual idea. It treats even the villain as someone who might still be healed, softened, and welcomed back in. For viewers raised on stories of good crushing evil, that felt like a completely kinder shape of story. The bears also lived together as one very close group, with no fear at all of open affection. They hugged one another freely, they cried in front of each other, and they said out loud how they felt. Open affection between characters was uncommon back then. And here, it was simply the whole culture of the show. That easy, open affection is a real part of why the show reads so clearly as coded now. It quietly modeled a world in which feeling something deeply and then showing it openly was completely normal. Many queer viewers say that gentle model helped them long before they had any of the right words for it. So Care Bears earns its firm place here, not through a hidden character, but through an entire mood. It was a safe, soft, and deeply caring space in the middle of a loud, hard, and macho decade. That rare space meant a very great deal to the children, who felt like they did not fit in anywhere else. The show quietly proves that coding is not only ever about villains, muscles, and hidden double lives. Sometimes the coding is about a feeling, a soft color, and a steady promise that gentleness truly matters. Care Bears made that exact promise to its young audience in nearly every single episode it aired. That leaves a bright and warm question hanging in the air as we move onward. If a team of caring bears could turn softness itself into a home, then what happens when a whole show is built from color? What happens when the hero is a young girl whose entire job is to paint a gray world in every shade of the rainbow? Care Bears coded its meaning into warm feeling, into shared tears, and into soft clouds high above the world. The next show, though, first pulls us across an ocean into a very different and much sharper kind of camp. At number 15, we leave the clouds behind for the streets of Britain, where a heroic mouse hides his coding in pure theater. Danger Mouse. Danger Mouse ran from the year 1981 to the year 1992, and it came out of Britain rather than America. It followed a heroic secret agent mouse and his nervous little sidekick as they saved the world from a parade of silly villains. It fits this list because it ran almost entirely on camp, that arch and theatrical comic style long tied to queer British humor. Danger Mouse himself was a loving spoof of the smooth and unshakable secret agent hero. He wore a white eye patch and a crisp white suit, and he never once seemed to lose his cool composure. But the show built around him was always played for big laughs, with a knowing wink hidden in nearly every scene. His constant sidekick was a small, timid, bespectacled hamster named Ernest Penfold. Penfold panicked, fussed, wailed, and hid behind the hero at the very first hint of any real danger. He was the soft, fearful helper standing beside the brave lead, a very classic and very old comic pairing. The close bond between the two of them is a real part of the coded reading of the show. They lived and worked together in a constant, close, and oddly domestic sort of partnership. Their odd couple closeness felt warm and homey, underneath all of the fast-moving spy jokes and gadgets. The thesis of this entry rests on style far more than on any single character or plot. British comedy has a very long and deep love of camp, of grand voices, big gestures, and knowing winks. Danger Mouse soaked itself completely in that style, and camp has always been a part of queer humor. The unseen narrator was a huge and constant part of that overall camp flavor. A booming, dramatic voice announced each new scene with a mixture of mock terror and pure theatrical delight. He treated every single silly moment as if it were high tragedy or grand opera, and that gap was the whole joke. The main recurring villain was a wheezing toad named Baron Silas Greenback. He whispered all of his evil plans in a strange, breathy voice while gently stroking a small pet caterpillar. He was theatrical, vain, and deeply odd, which made him yet another flamboyant villain in a decade already full of them. The whole show winked directly at its watching audience at almost every possible opportunity. It knew perfectly well that it was silly, and it very much wanted the viewer to know that it knew. That extra layer of knowing, self-aware humor is a true hallmark of camp, and camp is always coded ground. Danger Mouse is one of the shows sometimes folded into the broader talks about coded, flamboyant animation. It is only very rarely about one clearly gay character standing at the center of it. It is instead about a whole comic style that queer audiences have always felt strangely at home inside. The British setting gave the show a completely different flavor from the American toy cartoons. It was not built first and foremost to sell shelves full of plastic action figures and vehicles. It was built to be clever, quick, and very funny, which left far more room for arch and campy jokes. At the time it aired, most children simply found the whole thing genuinely hilarious to watch. They laughed hard at Penfold's constant panic, and at the narrator's wild, over-the-top expressions of fear. The camp sailed cleanly over their young heads as pure comedy, which is very often exactly how camp works. Honesty is owed here, just as it is everywhere else across this entire list. No one wrote Danger Mouse as a gay show, and the sidekick Penfold was never once labeled as anything. The reading is about comic tone and long tradition, and it is not about any confirmed or stated identity. But comic tone and long tradition are precisely the two things that camp is actually made of. A show does not need a single gay character in order to sit deep inside a queer comic tradition. Danger Mouse sat right in the very middle of that tradition steadily for more than 10 full years. There is a lesser-known point about the strange shape and structure of the show itself. It broke the fourth wall constantly, with the characters speaking directly to the viewer at home. That playful, self-aware, and slightly cheeky style is another clear thread that camp and queer comedy have always shared. The gentle partnership sitting at the very center of the show also matters a great deal. Danger Mouse and Penfold plainly cared for one another. Underneath all of the spy chaos and danger, the brave one and the fearful one together made an odd, sweet, and very tender little household of two. So the coding in this show is finally a matter of pure mood and manner rather than of plot. It lives inside the winks, the theatrical drama, the booming narrator, and the odd little pair at the heart. Those things gathered together made the whole show feel quietly and warmly queer to a great many later eyes. Danger Mouse quietly proves that camp could cross an entire ocean and still keep its full-coded charge. It brought a distinctly British flavor of theater, wit, and self-mockery to a list that is mostly American. That different flavor is exactly why so many fans still name it in these very discussions today. There is one more quality that ties Danger Mouse to the coded comic tradition. The show worked on two levels at once. One aimed at the children, and one aimed at the knowing adults. That double layer, where the real joke sits just above a child's head, is pure camp craft. That leaves a colorful question waiting for us as we turn back toward home once more. If a British spy spoof could hide its queerness inside camp and wit, then what about a show that hid it inside color? What about a bright young hero whose entire job in life was to fill a dull gray world with rainbows? Danger Mouse coded its meaning into arch British theater, into knowing winks, and into a sweet odd couple. The next show coded its meaning into the single most famous symbol the community would ever come to adopt. At number 14, a young girl and her band of color spirits gave the rainbow a loving home on TV years before it became a flag. Rainbow Bright. Rainbow Bright aired from the year 1984 to the year 1986, and it was built by a greeting card company to help sell a line of toys. It followed a brave young girl who worked to keep all color alive in a world that gloomy villains wanted to drain down to gray. It fits this list because its entire world was made of rainbows, and the rainbow would later become the single best-known symbol of the LGBT community. The hero of the show was a young girl first known as Wisp, who soon became Rainbow Bright. She wore a bright, cheerful outfit striped in color, and she rode across the sky on a flying horse named Starlight. Her whole job in the story was to spread color across the land and to push back the creeping gloom. She led a group called the Color Kids, and each of those children carried and guarded one shade of the spectrum. Together, they mined, gathered, and protected the colors that gave the entire world its light and life. The whole story was really one long fight to keep the rainbow alive against those who badly wanted it gone. The thesis of this entry is about a powerful symbol that the show itself could not possibly have planned. When Rainbow Bright first aired, the rainbow was still mostly just a pretty and cheerful band of color. Years later, it became the flag of pride worldwide, and the show quietly gained a meaning it never once chose. The rainbow flag itself had actually been created back in the late 1970s in San Francisco. But it took many years to spread and grow into the single global symbol that the whole world now knows. By the time it finally did, a whole generation had already grown up watching a rainbow hero every single week. That accidental timing is a real part of why the show reads as quietly coded today. A child who adored Rainbow Bright in the year 1985 grew up right alongside the rising rainbow flag. The two rainbows slowly blurred together in memory, and the innocent show took on a brand new layer of meaning. The villains of the show made the coding even clearer, though completely by accident. The gloomy Murky Dismal and his bumbling helper Lurky wanted to strip the entire world of all its color. They stood for gray, dull sameness, while the young heroes stood for bright, open, and joyful difference. That endless fight of bright color against dull gray is genuinely very easy to read a second way. Color can stand for the idea of being fully and openly yourself, loud and bright, and completely seen. Gray can stand for hiding, for blending in, and for being forced into a dull and safe and shrinking shape. Rainbow Bright is one of the shows named directly in queer coding roundups of the whole decade. It is not named because of any single hidden gay character standing somewhere inside the cast. It is named because the whole look, symbol, and message of the show line up so very neatly with Pride. The overall world of the show was soft, magical, gentle, and firmly led by a young girl. Like the other pastel cartoons already on this list, it sat very far from the war toys and the swords. It offered a bright and tender place for the kids who quietly wanted wonder far more than they wanted combat. At the time it aired, of course, none of this crossed a single young child's mind. They simply saw a girl, a beautiful flying horse, and a sky full of rainbows, and they loved every bit of it. The link to Pride and to the flag arrived only much later, once those same children had grown all the way up. Honesty matters here every bit as much as it does across the rest of this list. No one made Rainbow Bright as a gay show, and not one character in it was ever written as queer. This entry is entirely about a shared symbol that quietly changed its whole meaning long after the show had ended. But symbols carry an enormous amount of power, and this particular one changed nearly everything. The rainbow became a simple shorthand for an entire community and for its long fight to be openly seen. A show completely soaked in rainbows simply could not help but be pulled into that much larger story. There is a lesser-known layer sitting quietly inside the show's own central idea. Rainbow Bright did not merely enjoy color for its own sake, but actively guarded and protected it as a solemn duty. She fought again and again to keep brightness alive in a world that kept trying hard to erase it entirely. That idea of guarding your own brightness against those who want you dull is genuinely powerful. It reads almost like a small, simple fable about staying fully true to yourself under real and constant pressure. Many grown viewers now clearly see their own lives reflected back at them inside that gentle little fight. So the coding here is almost entirely about the symbol and the story that later grew up around it. The rainbow, the long fight against the gray, and the girl who kept color alive all point in one single direction. The show became queer in memory, even though it was very plainly never queer in its actual script. Rainbow Bright quietly shows just how far meaning can travel and arrive years after a show has ended. The images on the screen stayed exactly the same, but the whole world around those images changed completely. That is one of the strangest and most powerful ways that any old cartoon can ever earn a place on this list. There is one more reason the rainbow reading feels so natural in hindsight. The show treated brightness as something worth fighting for, and never as something to tone down or hide. That message, to stay vivid in a world that prefers gray, lands hard for anyone told to dim themselves. That leaves a shining question hanging in the air as we press onward and upward. If a rainbow hero could gain a whole new meaning from a flag, then what about a show built on space and shining metal? What about a team of heroes who traded soft pastel color for cold chrome, and yet still carried a real coded charge? Rainbow Bright coded its meaning into the single bright symbol that would one day come to mean Pride itself. The next show swapped all of those soft rainbows for gleaming rockets and sleek, mirrored silver armor. At number 13, a team of metal heroes soared through deep space with the same close bonds that keep landing these shows on the list. Silverhawks. Silverhawks aired in the year 1986, made by the same studio behind Thundercats, and it moved the action out into deep space. It followed a team of heroes who were partly metal and partly human, sent far from home to guard a distant galaxy from crime. It fits this list because its heroes were literally rebuilt into shining new bodies, and that idea of a remade Hidden Self reads as deeply queer. The show described its heroes with the memorable tagline, partly metal, partly real. Each member of the team had been surgically changed so their bodies could survive the cold of open space. They kept their human hearts and minds inside sleek, chrome, machine-built shells, and that split is the whole hook. The leader was a calm and steady pilot named Quicksilver, marked out by his bright silver hair. He guided a small, close-knit crew who lived and worked together far away from anyone they had once known. Their tight bond in a lonely galaxy echoes the same found family warmth that runs all through this list. The idea of being remade into a new body is where the strongest coded reading lives. Each hero chose to be changed, to become something new in order to live the life they truly wanted. For many queer viewers, that quiet story of choosing a new self to survive feels painfully familiar. The team also carried the same close, affectionate camaraderie that Thundercats had before it. The heroes teased each other, protected each other, and depended completely on one another out in the dark. In a show with almost no romance, that loyalty between teammates once again became the strongest feeling on screen. One member stood out clearly for reasons that had nothing to do with combat at all. His name was Bluegrass, and he was a country musician who flew into battle strumming an electric guitar. A singing, guitar-playing hero in a hard space war was a strange and theatrical touch that fans still love. Bluegrass brought a splash of showmanship and performance into an otherwise cold, metallic world. He was the flashy, expressive one on a team of quiet, mission-focused soldiers of the stars. That role of the flamboyant performer among the Stoics is a familiar and quietly coded one. The team also had a single female member named Steelheart, and her twin brother Steelwill. She was strong, brave, and fully equal to the men, but she stood alone in a world of male heroes. That lonely position of one woman among many men shows up again and again across these shows. The villain, a monstrous figure named Monstar, transformed into a huge, glowing, armored beast. His dramatic change echoed the hero's own rebuilding, turning the show once more into a story about altered bodies. Villain and hero alike were defined by transformation, by becoming something other than what they started as. Silverhawks is one of the space team shows that fans revisit in queer coding talks about the era. It is not about any single confirmed character hidden somewhere in the cast. It is about the strong theme of remade bodies and the deep bonds between a lonely crew. At the time, children mostly loved the show for the spaceships, the lasers, and the robot birds. They wanted the cool chrome wings and the flying metal hawks that gave the team its name. The deeper reading of the remade self only came into focus for many of them years later. Honesty belongs here just as it does everywhere else across this whole countdown. No one on the Silverhawks team ever said the show carried any hidden queer meaning inside it. The reading grows out of the theme of transformation and the close crew bonds, and not from any statement. Even so, the central metaphor is unusually strong and hard to miss once you see it. A story about people who change their own bodies to finally live freely is a powerful and resonant one. That metaphor gives Silverhawks a quiet emotional weight that its shiny space action never fully hides. The show also lived in that same soft space where feeling leaked out only between teammates. The heroes had no families and no romances waiting for them anywhere in the galaxy. All of their tenderness went into the crew, which quietly made the crew the true heart of the show. There's a lesser-known point about how completely these heroes gave up their old lives. They left Earth, left their pasts, and accepted new bodies, all for the sake of a distant new home. That total leap into a new self and a new world carries an obvious echo for many queer viewers. Leaving the old world to build a truer life somewhere far away is a story told over and over. The Silverhawks flew into deep space to do exactly that, trading everything familiar for something new. The bravery of that leap is part of why the show still lands emotionally with grown fans today. So Silverhawks offers coding of the body and coding of the bond at the very same time. The remade metal forms speak to a hidden chosen self, while the tight crew speaks to found family. Both threads are the same ones that keep pulling these particular shows onto this very list. There's one more detail that deepens the whole theme of the remade self. The heroes never mourned their old human bodies or begged to be changed back to what they were. They wore their new metal forms with pride, which turns the change from a loss into a real freedom. That leaves a cold and shining question hanging as we turn the corner once more. If Chrome heroes in deep space could carry this much coded feeling, what about a world that is soft, sweet, and pink? What about a whole cast of girls named after fruit and dessert, living in a land made entirely of sugar? Silverhawks coded its meaning into remade metal bodies and into the bonds of a lonely galactic crew. The next show trades cold space and chrome for warmth, scent, and an all-girl world drenched in pastel. At number 12, a cast of sweet fruit-named friends turned pure girlish softness into something queer viewers would later claim. Strawberry Shortcake. Strawberry Shortcake grew from a line of scented dolls into animated specials that ran across the early and middle 1980s. It followed a cheerful girl named Strawberry Shortcake and her friends who all lived in a bright land made of sweets and fruit. It fits this list because it built an intensely feminine, pastel, all-girl world, and queer viewers later claimed that soft world as their own. Every character in the show was named after a food and carried a matching sweet scent in doll form. There was blueberry muffin, lemon meringue, raspberry tart, huckleberry pie, and many more besides. The whole world was built around sweetness, softness, and gentle friendship rather than any kind of conflict. The land itself was a candy-colored dream of berry houses, dessert trees, and pastel skies. Nothing about it was hard, gritty, or aimed at the tough boy audience the action cartoons chased. It was femininity turned all the way up, and that pure excess is exactly where the camp lives. The thesis of this entry is about the joy of the deeply, unapologetically girly. The show celebrated sweetness, prettiness, and softness with no shame and no apology at all. For queer viewers, especially those who loved girly things they were told to hide, that celebration meant a great deal. Many boys of the era were taught that anything pink, sweet, or pretty was not for them. Strawberry Shortcake was all of those things at once, gathered proudly into a single bright package. The children who secretly loved it, against the rules, later saw it as an early act of quiet defiance. The show ran almost entirely on close friendships between its girl characters. They visited one another, helped one another, and solved small, gentle problems together as a group. There was no romance and no cruelty, only a warm circle of friends in a soft and welcoming world. That warm, all-female world is a big part of the coded reading of the show. A world with no men and no romance, built only on affection between girls, invites a queer eye naturally. The bonds between the characters were the entire point, and those bonds were tender and open. Strawberry Shortcake is one of the sweet pastel shows named in queer coding discussions of the decade. It is not because any character was ever written or confirmed as queer in the specials. It is because the whole feel of the show speaks to camp, to softness, and to reclaimed girlishness. At the time, the show was aimed squarely and openly at young girls and their dolls. It was a marketing tool first, built to sell scented figures off of toy store shelves. The deeper meaning came only later, from the grown viewers who never let go of that sweetness. Those grown viewers looked back at the pink world with real warmth and even pride. They remembered loving something soft and sweet in a childhood that often pushed them toward the hard. Many of them found in that memory a small, early sign of who they would grow up to be. Honesty is owed here in full, exactly as it is everywhere else on this list. No creator ever said Strawberry Shortcake was a queer show or that any friend in it was gay. This entry is about the celebration of the feminine and the audience that later embraced it. But the celebration of softness in a hard decade is its own kind of quiet statement. A show that says pretty sweet and gentle are good things sends a real signal to the children watching. That signal reached the kids who loved those things in secret, and it stayed with them for life. There is a lesser known layer in how completely the show refused all conflict. There were no real villains, no fights, and no danger of any serious kind anywhere in the specials. The stories were about feelings, friendships, and small kindnesses, and nothing ever needed to be defeated. That total gentleness made the show a genuine safe harbor for a certain kind of child. For any kid who found the loud, violent cartoons frightening, this was a soft place to land. That quality of pure refuge is a real part of why queer viewers hold on to it now. The all-girl friendships also modeled a world where affection between friends was simply normal. The characters loved each other openly, said so freely, and never once hid how they felt. Open, easy affection like that was uncommon then, and here it filled every single scene. So Strawberry Shortcake earns its place through mood, softness, and unashamed sweetness. It was a bright, gentle, all-girl world that welcomed exactly the children other shows pushed away. That welcome meant everything to the kids who loved pink and sweet against all the rules. The show proves once more that coding is not only about villains, muscles, or hidden double lives. Sometimes it is about sweetness, scent, and a soft pink world that quietly said you were allowed to like this. Strawberry Shortcake made that gentle offer to its audience in every single special it aired. There is one more gentle layer worth naming in the show's sweet world. It never once suggested that loving pretty and delicate things made a child any less worthy. That quiet permission to enjoy the soft and the pink without shame is the heart of its coded warmth. That leaves a soft and sugary question hanging as we move onward and upward. If a sweet, safe world of fruit and friendship could carry this much coded warmth, what about a dangerous one? What about a show where ordinary kids are pulled out of their world and into a strange, perilous land of magic? Strawberry Shortcake coded its meaning into sweetness, scent, and a proudly girly pastel world. The next show yanks us out of that safe garden and drops us into a place of monsters, magic, and real danger. At number 11, a group of misfit children fall through a doorway into a fantasy world where they finally become heroes. Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons aired from the year 1983 to the year 1985 based on the famous fantasy game of the same name. It followed a group of ordinary young teenagers who are pulled from a theme park ride into a strange and dangerous magical world. It fits this list because it is a story about misfit kids who find a place where they finally belong, which is one of the oldest queer stories there is. The 6 young heroes each received a magical gift and a new role when they arrived in the fantasy world. There was Hank the Ranger, Diana the Acrobat, Presto the Shy Magician, Eric the Cavalier, Sheila the Thief, and young Bobby the Barbarian. Together they formed an instant chosen family, thrown into a new world where they had to rely on one another completely. The idea of falling out of the ordinary world and into a truer one is the heart of the coded reading. These were kids who did not quite fit where they came from, suddenly given powers and a purpose elsewhere. For many queer viewers, that story of finding a hidden world where you finally matter feels deeply familiar. Their guide was a small, calm, mysterious figure known only as the Dungeon Master. He appeared without warning, spoke in riddles, and vanished again, offering gentle hints rather than plain answers. He was a quiet, wise mentor to a band of lost young people, a warm figure watching over their journey. The group itself was a true chosen family in every real sense of the phrase. They argued, forgave, protected each other, and slowly grew into a tight unit far from home. That deep bond between misfits who choose one another runs straight through so many queer stories. Presto, the Shy Magician, is one of the most fondly remembered members of the group. He was nervous, gentle, and unsure of himself, and his magic often failed him at the worst moments. The soft, sensitive boy who doubts himself is a character that many queer viewers quietly saw themselves in. Eric, the Cavalier, played the opposite role as the group's loud complainer and reluctant member. The mix of the brash one and the shy one gave the team its warmth and its gentle friction. Their very different personalities had to learn to fit together, which is a large part of the show's heart. The villain was a tall, dark-horned sorcerer named Venger, who chased the children across the land. He was theatrical, imposing, and dramatic, riding a black horse and casting spells in sweeping gestures. He was yet another grand, flamboyant villain in a decade that filled its bad guys with exactly that flair. Dungeons and Dragons is one of the shows that fans return to in queer coding discussions of the era. It is not because any of the 6 children was ever written or confirmed as queer. It is because the whole story is about outsiders who find a world and a family that finally fit them. At the time, most children simply loved the show for its monsters, magic, and adventure. They wanted the dragons, the spells, and the wild new creatures around every corner of the fantasy world. The deeper story of belonging only came into focus for many of them long afterward. The show also carried a quiet ache under all of its adventure. The children spent the entire series trying to find a way back home, yet also growing to love where they were. That tension between missing the old world and belonging in the new one is a very queer feeling indeed. Honesty is due here as it is throughout this whole countdown. No creator ever said Dungeons & Dragons was a queer show, or that any hero in it was gay. This entry is about the theme of the misfit finding a home, and about the found family at its center. But the theme of belonging is one of the strongest and most resonant on the entire list. A story about kids who never fit in until they fall into a world made for them speaks straight to the heart. That story reached the young viewers who felt out of place, whatever the makers had intended. There's a lesser-known layer in how the group was built to complement one another. Each child had a weakness that another child covered, so the team only worked when they stood together. That idea of a family whose members complete each other is a warm and quietly powerful one. The show also let its heroes be scared, unsure, and imperfect in ways that were rare then. They did not always win. They often doubted themselves, and they leaned hard on each other to keep going. That honesty about fear and doubt is part of why the show still lands with grown fans today. So Dungeons & Dragons earns its place through the deep theme of the outsider finding a home, the portal to another world, the chosen family, and the shy, sensitive hero all point the same way. Those threads speak clearly to anyone who ever longed for a place where they finally belonged. The show proves that coding can live in a story's very shape, not just in a character's design. Sometimes it is about a doorway into a truer world, and a family you choose rather than the one you are given. Dungeons & Dragons built its whole run around exactly that longing, week after week. There is one more quiet truth in the way the children came to relate to one another. They arrived from different backgrounds and did not always get along smoothly at first. Learning to accept and protect each other's differences became the whole emotional core of the show. That leaves a bold question hanging as we climb still higher up the list. If a band of misfit kids in a fantasy world could carry this much coded longing, what about a world of pure glamour? What about a cast of impossibly rich teenagers living lives of fashion, luxury, and non-stop drama? Dungeons & Dragons coded its meaning into a portal, a chosen family, and the longing to finally belong. The next show leaves magic and monsters behind for mansions, limousines, and closets full of designer clothes. At number 10, a group of glamorous teens turned wealth, fashion, and pure drama into a camp spectacle all their own. Beverly Hills Teens. Beverly Hills Teens aired in the year 1987, and it followed a group of impossibly wealthy teenagers in the famous rich neighborhood. It showed their glamorous daily lives full of fashion, parties, limousines, and constant light-hearted drama. It fits this list because it ran entirely on glamour and camp, a heightened, over-the-top style that queer audiences have always loved. The teens of the show lived lives that no real teenager could ever possibly afford. They had personal chauffeurs, private malls, endless wardrobes, and money that never once ran out. The whole show was a fantasy of pure luxury, taken so far that it became gently ridiculous on purpose. That deliberate excess is the very heart of camp, and camp is where this entry lives. Everything was bigger, shinier, and more dramatic than real life. And the show clearly knew it. It served glamour as spectacle, and spectacle for its own sake is a deeply queer kind of pleasure. One character in particular carried the show's diva energy on her shoulders. Bianca was the wealthy, vain, dramatic queen bee, always dressed to impress and always at the center of the fuss. The larger-than-life diva is a figure queer audiences have adored on screen for generations. The thesis of this entry is about the joy of glamour turned all the way up. The show celebrated fashion, beauty, and drama with total commitment and not a trace of shame. That loving, over-the-top celebration of style is exactly the sensibility that camp is built on. The fashion itself was a genuine centerpiece, rather than a background detail. Outfits, hairstyles, and accessories changed constantly, and the show lingered lovingly on every one. A cartoon this focused on clothing and glamour naturally drew the eye of style-loving viewers. The drama was always light, silly, and warm rather than cruel or heavy. Feuds were about parties, crushes, and fashion, and everything wrapped up sweetly by the end. That mix of high glamour and low stakes gave the show a frothy, delightful, and campy tone. The world of the show had almost no real conflict or danger in it at all. It was a bright bubble of wealth where the biggest worry was what to wear to the next event. That safe, glittering bubble is part of what makes the show such a comforting camp escape. Beverly Hills Teens is one of the glamour shows named in queer coding roundups of the decade. It is not because any teen in the cast was ever written or confirmed as queer. It is because the entire show breathes camp, glamour, and joyful, knowing excess. At the time, the show was aimed at young viewers who dreamed of wealth and style. It was a fantasy of the good life, all sparkle and shopping and sunny California days. The camp reading came later, from grown viewers who recognized the sensibility for what it was. Those grown viewers looked back and saw a show that shared their own love of spectacle. They had always adored glamour, drama, and the diva, and here was a whole cartoon built from it. The show became a small camp treasure precisely because it took style so gloriously seriously. Honesty belongs here, as it does across this entire list. No creator ever said Beverly Hills Teens was a queer show or that anyone in it was gay. This entry is about a camp sensibility and the audience that later claimed it as their own. But a sensibility can be just as coded as any single character in a story. A show this devoted to glamour, drama, and excess speaks a language queer audiences know well. Beverly Hills Teens spoke that language fluently in every glittering episode. There is a lesser-known point about how earnest the show was under all its sparkle. It never mocked its characters for loving fashion and beauty, but celebrated them for it instead. That warmth toward glamour, rather than scorn, is part of why the show reads as coded now. The show also let its characters be dramatic and expressive without any shame. Big feelings, big outfits, and big reactions were simply the normal texture of every day. That freedom to be loud and expressive is a joy that queer viewers recognize instantly. So Beverly Hills Teens earns its place through pure camp, glamour, and joyful excess. It was a glittering bubble of style and drama that took delight in every over-the-top moment. That delight is exactly the sensibility that later viewers named as quietly and happily queer. The show proves that coding can live in tone and taste, not only in plot or character. Sometimes it is about glamour, spectacle, and the pure joy of taking style completely seriously. Beverly Hills Teens built its whole shiny world around exactly that joy. There is one more reason the show reads as such a camp treasure now. It never once treated glamour as silly or shallow, but as something to celebrate completely. That refusal to look down on style and drama is exactly what draws a queer eye straight to it. That leaves a glamorous question hanging as we cross into the top half of the list. If a cartoon about rich teens could carry this much camp and coded joy, what about a world of magical little horses? What about a pastel land of ponies whose whole purpose was friendship, and that a generation would later reclaim with pride? Beverly Hills Teens coded its meaning into glamour, fashion, drama, and the pure delight of camp excess. The next show trades limousines and designer gowns for rainbow manes, soft meadows, and gentle magic. At number 9, a herd of colorful ponies made friendship itself the whole point, and a new generation would turn that into something proud. My Little Pony grew from a toy line into animated specials and a series that ran across the middle 1980s. It followed a herd of colorful ponies who lived in a gentle land and solved their problems through friendship and kindness. It fits this list because it made friendship its entire purpose, and later generations reclaimed that soft, girly world with open pride. The ponies each had a soft pastel coat, a flowing mane, and a small symbol printed on the flank. They lived together as a close herd in a peaceful land of meadows, castles, and gentle magic. Their world had no war and no cruelty at its center, only friendship and the small troubles of daily life. The stories nearly always turned on the ponies helping one another through a problem. They faced sadness, fear, or a villain, and they won by sticking together rather than by fighting alone. Friendship was not a side theme in this show, but the actual engine that drove every single plot. The thesis of this entry rests on that celebration of friendship and softness. In a decade that told boys to be hard and alone, this show said that gentle bonds were the greatest strength. The children who loved that message against the rules later saw it as an early and quiet comfort. The cast was almost entirely female. A herd of mares in a bright and welcoming world. A human girl named Megan sometimes joined them, but the heart of the show stayed with the ponies themselves. That all-female community, built on open affection, naturally invites the same queer eye as the other pastel shows. The villains the ponies faced were often dramatic and strange, from witches to sorcerers, but the ponies rarely won by destroying them, choosing instead to outlast them through unity and heart. That gentle approach to conflict set the show far apart from the war cartoons of its day. The look of the show was pure softness, all pastel coats and rainbow manes and sunny skies. Nothing about it was gritty or aimed at the tough boy crowd that the action shows chased so hard. It was femininity and gentleness turned all the way up, which is a familiar note across this list. My Little Pony is a show that grown viewers reclaimed with real fondness in later years. The reclaiming was not about a hidden gay character anywhere in the original cast. It was about loving something soft and kind that the world had labeled as only for girls. That act of reclaiming is a huge part of the My Little Pony story across the decades. The franchise returned again and again, and each time new fans embraced it far beyond its target audience. Loving the pastel and the gentle openly, past all the old rules, became a small act of pride. At the time, the 80s show was aimed squarely at young girls and their toys. It was built to sell colorful plastic ponies from the shelves of every toy store in the country. The deeper meaning of the show grew slowly from the viewers who never stopped loving it. Honesty is owed here just as it is throughout this whole countdown. No creator ever said the original My Little Pony was a queer show, or that any pony was gay. This entry is about the celebration of friendship and the audience that later claimed the show with pride. But the open celebration of gentle friendship carries its own quiet power. A show that says soft bonds are strong sends a real signal to any child who feels too tender for the world. That signal reached the kids who needed it, and it stayed with many of them for the rest of their lives. There is a lesser-known layer in how completely the show trusted kindness. The ponies solved nearly everything with patience, care, and loyalty rather than with force. That deep faith in gentleness over strength is rare, and it is part of why the show is beloved now. The herd also modeled a world where showing affection openly was simply the norm. The ponies told each other how they felt, comforted one another, and never hid their care. Open affection like that was uncommon in the cartoons of the day, and here it filled every scene. So My Little Pony earns its place through friendship, softness, and the long story of its reclaiming. It was a gentle, all-female world that welcomed the very children other shows pushed away. That welcome, and the pride with which fans later claimed it, is what lands the show on this list. The show proves that coding can grow across time through the love of an audience. Sometimes it is about a soft world that a new generation chooses to embrace out loud and without shame. My Little Pony became that world, reclaimed again and again long after the 80s had ended. There is one more reason the show's reclaiming runs so deep across the years. Each new generation of fans found the very same gentle message waiting there for them. Friendship as the greatest strength is a message that never once stopped mattering to those who needed it. There is also a quiet lesson in the way the ponies treated anyone who was different. They welcomed newcomers and outsiders into the herd rather than turning them away at the edge. That open, accepting spirit is a big part of why the show is so beloved by queer fans today. That leaves a gentle question hanging as we push deeper into the top half of the list. If a herd of soft ponies could carry this much reclaimed pride, what about heroes who change their very bodies to survive? What about a team of warriors who transform into new forms just to enter a whole other world beneath the waves? My Little Pony coded its meaning into friendship, softness, and a pastel world reclaimed with pride across the years. The next show dives underwater, where heroes must become something new entirely to live and fight in a hidden realm. At number 8, a team of ocean warriors transform into part fish forms, carrying the same theme of the remade self we have already seen shine in space. Tiger Sharks. Tiger Sharks aired in the year 1987, made by the studio behind Thundercats and Silverhawks, and it moved the action underwater. It followed a team of heroes who could transform into part human, part fish forms in order to live and fight on a water world. It fits this list because its heroes changed their bodies to enter another world. And that story of transformation reads as quietly queer. The heroes came from a spaceship and discovered a distant planet almost entirely covered by ocean. To survive beneath the waves, They used a special power that changed their bodies into aquatic forms. Each hero took on the traits of a different sea creature, becoming something new the moment they transformed. That act of transformation is the heart of the coded reading, exactly as it was for the Metal Silverhawks. The heroes had two selves, a land self and a water self, and they shifted between them as needed. For many queer viewers, that story of a second hidden self that appears only in the right world feels familiar. The team lived and worked together far from any home, deep in a strange new realm. They depended on one another completely, sharing a bond that grew tight in their isolation. That close camaraderie among a small crew is a thread that keeps returning across this list. The heroes' water forms were sleek, smooth, and powerful, built for grace beneath the sea. The animation lingered on their transformed bodies gliding and darting through the deep. That loving attention to the transformed form is part of why the show reads the way it does. Tiger Sharks was part of a shared block of shows that fans revisit in queer coding talks of the era. It is not because any single character was ever written or confirmed as queer. It is because the theme of the remade self and the tight crew runs all through it. The idea of needing a different body to belong in a different world is a powerful one. On land, the heroes were one thing, but only in the water did they become fully what they needed to be. That gap between the surface self and the true self is a deeply resonant queer image. The villains of the show also transformed and schemed, keeping the focus on shifting shapes. Everyone in the story was defined by change, by becoming something other than where they started. That shared theme of transformation ties the whole show together under one clear idea. At the time, children mostly loved the show for the underwater adventures and the sea monsters. They wanted the cool transformations and the strange creatures of the deep on the water world. The deeper reading of the remade self came into focus, for many of them only years later. Honesty belongs here just as it does across the rest of this countdown. No one on the Tiger Sharks team ever said the show carried any hidden queer meaning. The reading grows from the theme of transformation and the close crew bonds, not from a statement. Even so, the central metaphor is strong and clear once you notice it. A story about people who change their bodies to finally live freely in the right place resonates deeply. That metaphor gives Tiger Sharks a quiet weight beneath all of its bright underwater action. The show also lived in that same soft space, where feeling flowed only between teammates. The heroes had no families and no romances waiting anywhere on the water world. All of their care went into the crew, which quietly made the crew the true heart of the show. There is a lesser-known point in how the heroes embraced their new forms. They did not fear the change, but used it gladly, becoming their water selves whenever they needed to. That comfort with transformation, treating it as freedom rather than curse, is quietly moving. Choosing your form and moving happily between two selves is a gentle and powerful idea. The Tiger Sharks did exactly that, at home in both the world above and the world below. That ease with two selves is part of why the show still lands with some viewers today. So Tiger Sharks offers coding of the body and coding of the bond at the very same time. The transformed sea forms speak to a hidden, chosen self, and the tight crew speaks to found family. Both threads are the same ones that keep pulling these particular shows onto this list. The show proves that the theme of transformation could travel from space to the sea and keep its charge. Whether in chrome above the stars or in scales beneath the waves, the story of the remade self held. Tiger Sharks carried that story quietly through every underwater adventure it aired. There is one more reason the underwater setting fits the coded reading so neatly. The heroes could only become their true powerful selves once they entered the water below. That idea of a self that only comes alive in the right place is deeply familiar to many viewers. There is also a real gentleness in how the crew treated their strange new world. They did not conquer the ocean planet, but slowly learned to live within it and protect it. That care for a world they had to adapt to gives the show a quiet warmth beneath the action. That leaves a rippling question hanging as we swim onward and upward. If heroes who change into fish could carry this much coded feeling, what about a show built on music and pure performance? What about a band of teens pulled into a bright cartoon world where glam, style, and the stage are everything? Tiger Sharks coded its meaning into transformed bodies and into the bonds of a crew lost far from home. The next show leaves the ocean behind for stage lights, electric guitars, and the glittering world of the music video. At number 7, a group of young musicians fall into a wild animated realm where glam, rock, and pure performance rule everything. Kid Video aired in the year 1984, and it mixed live-action actors with animation in a single show. It followed a young band who are kidnapped into a cartoon world called The Flip Side, where they have adventures set to pop music. It fits this list because it lived and breathed glam, style, and pure performance, a sensibility long tied to queer pop culture. The show was built around music, with the band playing songs throughout nearly every episode. It arrived at the height of the music video era, when style, image, and performance ruled pop culture. That world of glam and spectacle is where this entry finds its coded charge. The Flip Side itself was a wild, colorful, animated realm, full of strange characters and bright design. It was a world where image and performance mattered more than almost anything else. A whole cartoon built around music, style, and the stage naturally draws a queer eye. The thesis of this entry is about glam, the flashy and androgynous style of 80s pop. The music video era loved bold looks, big hair, and a blurring of the old lines of gender. Kid Video swam in that same water, and glam has always been close to queer culture. The band members dressed in the bold, colorful fashion of the day, all style and attitude. Their look echoed the pop stars of the era, many of whom played openly with gender and image. That flashy, expressive style is a big part of why the show reads as coded now. The villains were a group called the Master Blaster and his henchmen, the Blue Guys. They were theatrical and silly, chasing the band through the strange world of the Flip Side. They were yet another set of flamboyant cartoon villains in a decade that overflowed with them. Kid Video is one of the shows that fans revisit in queer coding discussions of the era. It is not because any band member was ever written or confirmed as queer. It is because the whole show breathes glam, performance, and the bold style of the music video age. The mix of real actors and animation gave the show a strange, dreamlike quality. The band crossed from the real world into a bright cartoon realm and back again. That crossing between worlds is another quiet echo of the double life seen across this list. At the time, the show was aimed at young fans of pop music and cartoons alike. It was a fun, flashy package of songs, style, and adventure for the MTV generation of kids. The camp reading came later, from grown viewers who recognized the glam for what it was. Those grown viewers looked back and saw a show soaked in the style they had always loved. They had adored the bold looks and the gender-bending pop stars of the 80s. Here was a whole cartoon built from that same glittering, expressive spirit. Honesty is owed here as it is everywhere on this list. No creator ever said Kid Video was a queer show or that anyone in the band was gay. This entry is about a glam sensibility and the audience that later claimed it. But a sensibility can be coded just as clearly as any single character. A show this devoted to music, style, and performance speaks a language queer audiences know. Kid Video spoke that glam language in every song and every bright animated frame. There is a lesser-known layer in how the show blurred the ordinary and the fantastic. The band lived a double existence, ordinary teens in one world and cartoon stars in another. That split between the plain self and the dazzling performing self is a very queer kind of story. The show also let its heroes be expressive, stylish, and dramatic without any shame. Big looks, big songs, and big feelings were simply the normal texture of the Flip Side. That freedom to be bold and expressive is a joy queer viewers recognize at once. So Kid Video earns its place through glam, performance, and the bold style of the music video era. It was a bright musical world where image and expression were everything. That spirit is exactly the sensibility that later viewers named as quietly and happily queer. The show proves that coding can live in style, music, and the pure joy of performance. Sometimes it is about glam, spectacle, and a world where being bold and expressive is the whole point. Kid Video built its wild animated realm around exactly that joy. There's one more reason the show sits so comfortably inside the glam tradition. It treated music and performance as a doorway leading into a brighter and freer world. That idea of finding your true self up on the stage is one queer audiences have always understood. There is also a warmth in how the band stuck together through every strange adventure. They faced the wild cartoon world as one tight group, protecting one another at every turn. That loyalty among friends chasing a shared dream is a quietly tender heart beneath all the glam. That leaves a flashy question hanging as we climb toward the very top of the list. If a glam music cartoon could carry this much coded style, What about a performer who refuses the role he was born to play? What about a vampire who wants nothing more than to sing and dazzle on the stage instead of frightening anyone? Kid Video coded its meaning into glam, music, and the dazzling double life of a performing band. The next show gives us a single unforgettable performer who rejects the very identity everyone expects of him. At number 6, a vampire duck turns his back on being a monster and dreams instead of becoming a star. Count Duckula. Count Duckula aired from the year 1988 to the year 1993, and it came out of Britain as a spin-off from Danger Mouse. It followed a vampire duck who, against all his family's history, refuses to be a monster and dreams instead of fame as an entertainer. It fits this list because its hero rejects the identity everyone expects of him, and that refusal to play an assigned role reads as deeply queer. Count Duckula was born from a long line of terrifying vampire ducks who preyed on the living. But this Duckula came out completely wrong, at least by his family's dark standards. He was a cheerful vegetarian who wanted to sing, travel, and become a beloved star instead. That refusal to be what his bloodline demanded is the heart of the coded reading. Everyone around him expected a monster, and he simply refused to become one. For many queer viewers, that story of rejecting the role you were assigned at birth hits very close to home. Duckula was theatrical, vain, and dramatic in nearly everything he did. He struck poses, made grand speeches, and treated his whole life as a stage performance. That flamboyant, larger-than-life style is a familiar and quietly coded one across this list. His great dream was showbiz, fame, and applause rather than fear and blood. He longed to be adored on the stage, to sing and dazzle and win the crowd's love. A monster who wants only to perform and be loved is a gentle and very campy figure. The show surrounded him with a small, odd household who cared for him in their way. There was his loyal butler Igor, who kept trying and failing to make him properly evil. That warm, strange little family is another quiet echo of the found families seen across this list. Count Duckula is one of the shows folded into broader talks about coded, flamboyant animation. It is not because the character was ever written or confirmed as queer. It is because his whole story is about refusing an assigned identity and choosing his own instead. The British setting gave the show the same camp flavor as Danger Mouse before it. It was arch, theatrical, and full of knowing winks aimed right at the audience. That camp style, so tied to queer comedy, ran all through Duckula's adventures. At the time, children simply found the vampire duck funny and endearing. They laughed at his failed schemes, his dramatic flair, and his gentle, harmless nature. The deeper reading of the refused identity came into focus for many of them only later. Honesty is owed here, just as it is throughout this whole countdown. No creator ever said Count Duckula was a queer show or that the duck was gay. This entry is about the theme of rejecting an expected role and the camp style around it. But the theme of refusing an assigned identity is one of the strongest on the entire list. A hero who is told exactly what he must be and who says no instead speaks straight to the heart. That story reached the viewers who knew what it meant to refuse a role forced upon them. There's a lesser-known layer in how gently the show treated his difference. Duckula was never punished for wanting a softer, brighter life than his family demanded. He was the loved and central hero, dreams and flair and all, which was rare for such a figure. That acceptance of his difference is a real part of why the show reads as coded now. He was not the villain for wanting to sing instead of frighten, but the beloved lead. For a character built entirely on refusing his expected role, that acceptance was quietly powerful. The show also let him be dramatic, expressive, and theatrical without any shame. His big feelings and grand performances were simply the normal texture of every episode. That freedom to be loud, soft, and expressive is a joy queer viewers recognize at once, so Count Duckula earns its place through the theme of the refused identity and its camp style. He was a monster who chose to be a performer, a creature who rejected the role he was handed. That choice, and the warmth with which the show treated it, is what lands the character here. The show proves that coding can live in a hero's central choice, not only in his design. Sometimes it is about refusing to be what everyone expects and choosing your own brighter path instead. Count Duckula built his whole run around exactly that refusal, episode after episode. There is one more reason the duck's refusal feels so resonant even today. He did not just reject being a monster one time, but chose his own path over and over again. That cheerful, repeated insistence on being himself is exactly what makes the character so endearing. There's also a gentleness in the way the show framed his constant failures. Every time his showbiz dreams collapsed around him, he simply dusted himself off and tried once more. That stubborn hope, in the face of a world that expected something darker, is quietly moving. That leaves a theatrical question hanging as we reach the top 5 of the list. If a vampire duck who refuses to be a monster could carry this much coded meaning, what about a gentle tribe of forest creatures? What about a whole show built on softness and peace in a decade that demanded its heroes be tough and hard? Count Duckula coded its meaning into a hero who rejected the monstrous role his own family demanded. The next show trades the theatrical castle for a quiet forest and a tribe that lives entirely without aggression. At number 5, a gentle band of little woodland folk built a whole world on softness in an era that prized the opposite. Paws aired in the year 1985, and it followed a tribe of small, bear-like creatures who lived in harmony with nature. The Paws were gentle, peaceful, and deeply connected to the natural world and to a set of magical paw stones. It fits this list because it built a whole world on softness and peace. In a decade that demanded its heroes be tough and hard, the Paws lived together as a close tribe in a lush and gentle forest world. They shared their days with the animals and the land, treating all of nature as part of their family. There was no aggression at the center of their culture. Only care, balance, and community. Each paw carried a special connection to a magical paw stone that gave a gentle power. They used these powers to protect their home and to help one another, never to conquer or destroy. Their magic was tied to harmony and healing rather than to war, which set the tone for the whole show. The thesis of this entry is about a world built entirely on gentleness in a hard-edged decade. While the big cartoons sold war and toughness, Paws offered peace, care, and connection. The children who loved that softness, against the rules, quietly found a home in it. The tribe faced a villain named Dark Paw, who wanted to seize their power for himself. But even against him, the Paws relied on unity and cleverness far more than on force. Their gentle approach to conflict placed them firmly among the soft-coded shows on this list. The look of the show matched its peaceful heart in every frame. It was warm, rounded, and natural, full of forests, animals, and soft earthy color. Nothing about it was gritty or built for the tough boy crowd. The action shows chased so hard. Paws lived in the same soft space as the other gentle cartoons that later viewers reclaimed. The reclaiming was not about a hidden gay character anywhere in the tribe. It was about loving a world of peace and softness that the era pushed many children away from. The tribe modeled a community where care and cooperation were simply the way of life. The Paws helped one another freely and treated their differences as strengths, not flaws. That vision of a gentle, accepting community speaks quietly to anyone who ever felt unwelcome. At the time, the show was a fairly small entry aimed at young children. It was a soft adventure about a peaceful tribe and their gentle magic in the woods. The deeper meaning of that softness came into focus for many viewers only years later. Honesty is owed here just as it is throughout this whole countdown. No creator ever said Paws was a queer show, or that any member of the tribe was gay. This entry is about the celebration of gentleness and the community it built on screen. But the open celebration of peace and softness carries its own quiet power. A show that says gentleness is strength sends a real signal to any child who feels too tender for the world. That signal reached the kids who needed it, and it stayed with some of them for good. There is a lesser-known layer in how completely the show rejected aggression. The Paws almost never won by force, choosing patience, unity, and heart instead. That deep faith in gentleness over strength is rare, and it is part of the show's quiet charm. The tribe also lived as a community where open care was simply normal. The Paws looked after one another and the land with easy, honest affection. That kind of open care was uncommon in the cartoons of the day, and here it shaped the whole world. So Paws earns its place through peace, softness, and a gentle, accepting community. It was a warm, natural world that welcomed the very children other shows pushed away. That welcome is what lands the quiet little tribe on this list at all. The show proves that coding can live in a whole way of life, not just in one character. Sometimes it is about a peaceful world that says softness and care are the real strengths. Paws built its gentle forest home around exactly that belief. There is one more reason the tribe's gentleness stands out so very sharply. In a decade full of loud, aggressive heroes, the Paws chose quiet cooperation instead. That single choice made the show a rare soft voice among a whole crowd of shouting ones. There is also a warmth in the way the tribe treated the natural world all around them. They lived as a part of nature rather than as its masters or its would-be conquerors. That respect for balance and belonging gives the show a gentle and welcoming spirit. There is one more quiet strength in the way the Paws faced down their fears. They met danger with unity and courage, rather than with anger, aggression, or brute force. That gentle bravery is its own kind of power, and it is a real part of the show's lasting charm. That leaves a quiet question hanging as we cross into the final four of the list. If a peaceful forest tribe could carry this much coded gentleness, what about the very studio behind the biggest icons of all? What about a space western made by the same company that gave the world its most famous queer-read cartoons? Paws coded its meaning into peace, gentleness, and a forest community built entirely on care. The next show comes from a legendary studio whose work sits at the very center of this whole story. At number 4, a space cowboy marshal rides in from the same company. That would soon give us the two biggest icons on this list. Brave Star. Brave Star aired from the year 1987 to the year 1988, and it was the final series from a famous studio called Filmation. It followed a space-age marshal on a distant frontier planet, a lawman who drew on animal spirit powers to keep the peace. It fits this list because of the studio behind it, a company whose work sits at the very heart of this whole queer coding story. The hero, Marshal Bravestar, protected a rough frontier world that mixed the Old West with outer space. He could call on the strength of a bear, the speed of a puma, the eyes of a hawk, and the ears of a wolf. That connection to hidden animal spirits gave him a dual nature, a self beyond the plain lawman others saw. The studio that made him, Filmation, is the real reason this show sits so high on the list. Filmation was the same company that produced the two biggest icons in this entire countdown. Its work runs like a thread through the story of queer coding in 80s animation. Filmation was led by a man named Lou Scheimer, and its studio culture was unusually open for its day. It was known for hiring a wide range of artists and for a spirit that was welcoming behind the scenes. That inclusive culture helped shape the very shows, now remembered as queer icons of the decade. The thesis of this entry is about the studio as much as the show itself. Bravestar was the last work of a company whose cartoons became beloved by queer audiences. To understand the icons at the top of this list, you have to understand the studio that made them. Bravestar himself carried the same soft undercurrent seen in other coded heroes. He was a hero of two natures, the calm lawman and the spirit-powered warrior within. That idea of a hidden, deeper self beneath the surface is one this list keeps returning to. The show also tried, for its time, to tell gentle and thoughtful stories. It touched on hard subjects and aimed for heart, not just action and toy sales. That care and sensitivity set it apart from many of the louder cartoons of the era. As the final Filmation series, Bravestar marked the end of a remarkable studio. The company that had shaped so much of this story closed its main run with this show. That makes Bravestar a fitting last stop before the two great icons it helped make possible. At the time, children watched Bravestar for the space western action and the animal powers. They wanted the frontier adventures and the Marshal's amazing gifts on the strange planet. The deeper story about the studio and its place in queer history came clear only later. Honesty is owed here just as it is throughout this whole countdown. No one said Bravestar himself was a gay character, and this entry does not claim that. It rests on the studio behind the show and the hero's quiet theme of a hidden deeper self. But the studio connection is a genuinely important thread in this larger story. The company that made Bravestar also made the cartoons that queer audiences hold dearest. That link places this show at a real and meaningful point. In the history of coded animation, there is a lesser-known layer in how the studio approached its heroes. Filmation often gave its characters gentleness, heart, and a sense of inner life beyond the action. That softness in its heroes is part of why its shows resonated so deeply with queer viewers. Bravestar shared that gentleness, a tough marshal with a thoughtful and caring heart. He was strong, yes, but also kind, wise, and connected to something larger than himself. That blend of strength and softness is a quiet echo of the coding across this list. So Bravestar earns its place mostly through the studio that gave it life. It was the last work of the company behind the two greatest icons in this whole story. That lineage is what lands the Space Marshal so high on the countdown. The show proves that coding can live in a legacy, not only in a single character. Sometimes it is about the studio, the culture, and the string of cartoons that a company left behind. Bravestar stands as the final chapter of exactly that remarkable studio. There's one more reason the studio's legacy matters so much to this whole story. Filmation's shows often carried a gentleness and a real heart that many other cartoons simply lacked. That tender quality is a big part of why the studio's heroes resonated so deeply with queer viewers. There is also meaning in the way Bravestar himself balanced strength with wisdom. He was a powerful lawman, yet he clearly preferred understanding and patience to raw force. That blend of power and gentleness echoes the soft, strong heroes seen all across this list. There is one more quiet note in the show's place. At the very end of an era, as Filmation closed its doors for good, Bravestar marked the final chapter of a remarkable run. The studio that shaped so much of this queer history bowed out with a thoughtful and gentle hero. That leaves a bright question hanging. As we reach the final three of the list, if the studio behind the icons could earn a place, what about a hero who lived two lives openly on screen? What about a glamorous rock star who hid an ordinary woman behind the lights, changing her whole self in an instant? Bravestar coded its meaning into a legendary studio and a hero of two hidden natures. The next show gives us one of the clearest double lives on this entire list, wrapped in glam music and dazzling lights. At number 3, a rock star and the quiet woman behind her share one body and one enormous secret. Jem and the Holograms aired from the year 1985 to the year 1988, and it followed a glamorous rock star and her band. Its hero was really two people at once, a quiet music executive named Jerica and her dazzling stage self, Jem. It fits this list because it is built entirely on a secret double life and a glam transformation, both of which read as deeply queer. Jerica ran a music company and a home for girls by day, living a fairly ordinary and grounded life. But with the help of a hidden supercomputer named Synergy, she could transform into the rock star Jem. That single transformation split her into two selves, one plain and private, one dazzling and public. The change happened through a pair of special earrings that projected a whole new look over her. In an instant, her hair, her clothes, and her entire image shifted into the glamorous star Jem. That magical shift into a bolder, brighter self is a transformation many queer viewers know well. The thesis of this entry rests on that secret double life. At the heart of the show, Jerica had to hide who she really was, living openly as one person while secretly being another. That story of a hidden self, revealed only in the right moment, is one of the oldest queer stories there is. The transformation itself carried a strong flavor of glam and even of drag. Jem was a heightened, dazzling version of Jerica, all bold color, big style, and pure stage presence. Becoming a more glamorous, more expressive self through a magical change is a deeply campy delight. The show was drenched in glam rock fashion and the bright style of the music video era. Every episode was full of songs, outfits, and performances staged like little music videos. That world of glam and spectacle is one queer audiences have always loved and claimed. The rival band, the Misfits, brought even more camp and drama to the show. They were loud, flashy, and gloriously over the top, feuding with Jem in bold style. Their theatrical villainy added another rich layer of camp to an already dazzling show. Jem and the Holograms is one of the shows that fans revisit in queer coding discussions of the era. It is not only because of a single confirmed character somewhere in the cast, it is because the whole show is built on a secret self, a glam transformation, and pure spectacle. The band itself was a tight, all-female group bound by deep loyalty, and friendship. They supported one another through every trial, sharing Jerrica's enormous secret together. That circle of women keeping a hidden truth safe is a quietly powerful and coded image. At the time, the show was aimed at girls who loved music, fashion, and glamour. It was a dazzling package of song, style, and drama for young fans of pop culture. The deeper reading of the double life came into focus for many of them only later. Honesty is owed here just as it is throughout this whole countdown. No creator ever said Jerrica or Jem was a queer character in the original series. This entry rests on the themes of the secret self and the glam transformation, not on a statement. But the theme of the hidden self is one of the strongest on the entire list. A hero who lives openly as one person while secretly being another. Speaks straight to the heart. That story reached the viewers who knew what it meant to hide a truer self, whatever the makers intended. There is a lesser-known layer in how the two lives pulled at each other. Jerrica often struggled to balance her quiet, real self with the demands of her dazzling secret one. That tension between the private self and the public performance is a very queer kind of ache. The show also let its heroine be bold, glamorous, and expressive. Whenever she became Jem, through her transformation, she got to be louder, brighter, and more fully herself on the stage. That freedom to become a truer, bolder self is a joy queer viewers recognize at once. So Jem and the Holograms earns its high place through the secret self and the glam transformation. It was a dazzling show about a woman living two lives and hiding an enormous truth. That double life wrapped in glam and spectacle is what lands it so near the top of this list. The show proves that coding can live in a hero's very structure. In the split between two selves, sometimes it is about a hidden self revealed through transformation. Bold and dazzling and free, Jem built her whole glittering world around exactly that secret and that change. There is one more reason the double life feels so charged with hidden meaning. Jerrica could only fully shine, fully perform, and fully be seen once she became the star Jem. That idea of a hidden self that only comes alive in the spotlight is a deeply queer one. There is also a warmth in the way the band guarded Jerrica's enormous secret. They protected her hidden truth together, closing ranks around her without a moment of hesitation. That circle of loyal friends keeping a concealed self safe is a quietly powerful image. That leaves a dazzling question hanging as we reach the final two of the list. If a rock star with a secret self could carry this much coded meaning, what about a warrior princess who did the same? What about a hero whose modern return finally made the queer subtext of the 80s fully and proudly canon? Jem and the Holograms coded its meaning into a secret double life and a dazzling glam transformation. The next show takes that same idea of a hidden self and a transformation, and carries it onto the battlefield. At number 2, a warrior princess with a secret identity would, decades later, see her subtext become open, celebrated canon. She-Ra, Princess of Power. She-Ra, Princess of Power aired from the year 1985 to the year 1987 as a sister show to a bigger series. It followed Adora, a young woman who could transform into the powerful warrior She-Ra to lead a rebellion against an evil force. It fits this list because it paired a secret transformation with a modern reboot that finally made its queer subtext open, celebrated canon. Adora began as a soldier for the evil horde, before turning against it to join the side of good. By raising a magic sword and speaking special words, she transformed into the mighty She-Ra. That change split her into two selves, the quiet Adora and the powerful princess warrior. The transformation echoed the same secret self theme seen in Jem just before her. Adora lived a hidden double life, one person in private and another in the light of battle. That story of a concealed truer self is one this whole list keeps circling back to. She-Ra led a group called the Great Rebellion, made up largely of strong women. They fought together against the Horde, bound by loyalty, courage, and deep friendship. That circle of powerful women standing together invited a queer eye from the very start. The thesis of this entry has two parts, one from the 80s and one from much later. In its own day, She-Ra offered a secret transformation and a world of close female bonds. Decades later, A reboot of the show would take that subtext and make it fully and proudly open. In the year 2018, a new version of She-Ra arrived for a modern audience. It kept the transformation and the rebellion, but it told the story with open, honest hearts. That reboot became famous for turning the old subtext into real, celebrated representation. At the center of the new show was the bond between Adora and her rival Catra. Their long, painful, tender relationship grew across the series into something openly romantic. By the end, the two were confirmed as a canon couple, a landmark moment for the franchise. That payoff is exactly why She-Ra sits so near the very top of this list. The queer feeling that fans had sensed in the 80s original was finally made real and open. The subtext of one decade became the proud, beaming text of another. The original 80s show could never have said any of this out loud. It lived in the same coded world as every other cartoon on this list, hinting but never stating. The bonds were there, the transformation was there, but the open truth had to wait for later. The modern reboot honored that long wait by finally speaking plainly. It looked back at the coded original and chose to give its heroes the openness they never had. That act of turning old subtext into new canon is what makes She-Ra so meaningful here. At the time of the original, children simply loved She-Ra for the sword and the adventure. They wanted the transformation, the winged horse, and the fight against the evil horde. The deeper feeling of the show came into focus only as those children grew up. Honesty about the two eras is important for this entry. The original She-Ra was coded and interpretive, exactly like the other shows on this list. The open canon representation belongs to the modern reboot, which built proudly on that older foundation. But the link between the two eras is the whole point of the entry. The coded original planted a seed that the modern show finally allowed to bloom. That journey from subtext to text is one of the most powerful stories in all of this history. There is a lesser-known layer in how deeply fans had always felt the original's subtext. Long before the reboot, viewers had read the 80s She-Ra as quietly queer. The reboot did not invent that reading, but honored a feeling the audience had held for decades. The story of Adora and Catra gave that long-held feeling its full and open shape. Their journey from enemies to a couple became one of the most beloved arcs in modern animation. It was the payoff a whole generation had quietly waited for since the 80s, so She-Ra earns its high place through both its coded past and its openly canon future. It began as a secret transformation and a world of female bonds, hinting at what it could not say. It became, decades later, a proud and celebrated story that finally said it all out loud. The show proves that coding can be a promise that a later era finally keeps. Sometimes the subtext of one decade becomes the beaming, honest text of the next. She-Ra carried that promise from the 80s all the way to its joyful modern fulfillment. There is one more reason the long journey from subtext to canon matters so much. It showed that the feelings fans had quietly sensed for decades were real and worth honoring. The reboot did not rewrite the past so much as finally speak aloud the truth it had always held. That leaves only one question, and it is the biggest one of the whole list. If She-Ra's subtext could grow into open canon, then what did her twin brother do that no other cartoon dared? What did the single most famous hero of the decade do to earn the top spot on this entire countdown? She-Ra coded its meaning into a secret transformation, then saw a modern reboot make that meaning proud and open. The final show is her twin brothers, the one hero whose queer status went further than any other on this list. At number 1 stands the muscle-bound champion who became a bona fide gay icon, and the answer to the question that opened this whole video: He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe aired from the year 1983 to the year 1985, and it became one of the biggest cartoons of the decade. It followed a mighty warrior who defended a magical planet, transforming from a mild prince into the most powerful man in the universe. It sits at number 1 because He-Man did what no other cartoon on this list ever managed, becoming a fully acknowledged gay icon with his own place in history. The show came from the studio Filmation and was built to sell a huge line of Mattel action figures. The toys and the tie-in comics actually came first in the year 1982, and the cartoon followed close behind. Across more than 100 episodes, He-Man became a household name and a fixture of childhood in the 80s. The hero lived a double life on the magical planet of Eternia near the mysterious Castle Grayskull. In his everyday form, he was Prince Adam, a mild and gentle young man who seemed to avoid every fight. Only Adam and a tiny circle knew the enormous secret he carried beneath that soft, ordinary surface. The heart of the show was the transformation, and it was unforgettable for a whole generation. Adam would raise his sword and call out the words, "By the power of Grayskull," and then declare, "I have the power." In a flash of light, the mild prince became He-Man, the most powerful figure on the entire planet. That transformation is where the coding truly begins, because of what it revealed on screen. When Adam changed, most of his clothing vanished, leaving He-Man in little more than a harness and furry briefs. The camera lingered on a huge, near-nude, glistening muscular body, again and again, in every episode. That image became one of the most cited early sparks for a whole generation of gay men. Countless viewers later admitted that the sight of He-Man's body stirred something they could not yet name. The near-nude champion, revealed anew each week, is central to why the show is remembered as queer. Prince Adam himself deepened the reading through his soft and gentle everyday self. He was drawn in a lavender pink vest and white leggings, calm and mild, where He-Man was fierce. That contrast between the soft prince and the powerful hero is a classic image of a hidden self. The double life is the same coded story this whole list keeps returning to, now at its peak. Adam lived openly as one mild person while secretly being another, far more powerful self. That secret, revealed only in the right moment, echoes the hidden truths found all across these shows. The wider cast pushed the coding even further with its parade of muscular men. Many of the heroes and villains were drawn as huge, mustached, leather-clad figures of exaggerated strength. That look strongly recalled the muscular, mustached, gay style that was highly visible in the early 80s. The villain Skeletor added a rich layer of camp on top of all that muscle. He was theatrical, sneering, and gloriously over the top, hurling dramatic threats in a booming voice. He was the campy, flamboyant villain taken to its grandest possible height in the whole decade. Even the hero's name pointed straight at the body and at an exaggerated idea of maleness. Calling him He-Man turned masculinity itself into something huge, glossy, and almost of a spectacle. That over-the-top display of the male form is a big part of what queer audiences responded to. Over time, the people behind the brand did something genuinely rare for the era. Rather than deny the show's gay following, Mattel came to openly embrace its gay fanbase. That welcome from the very company that owned him set He-Man apart from every other show here. Even voices from inside the studio joined in on the reading with real warmth. Erica Scheimer, a member of the Filmation family, once joked openly that He-Man was gay. When people who helped make the show say things like that, the coding stops feeling like a stretch. And here's the answer to the question that opened this entire video. He-Man is the only cartoon character on this list with his very own encyclopedia entry as a gay icon. No other 80s cartoon here earned a whole documented page devoted to its status as a queer icon. That is what He-Man did that no other dared, and it is why he stands at number 1. He did not just carry quiet subtext or hopeful fan reading like the shows below him on this list. He crossed fully into the open, acknowledged by fans, by insiders, and even by his own toy maker. Honesty still matters, even here at the very top of the countdown. No episode of the original show ever stated that He-Man or Prince Adam was gay in plain words, but the icon status is real, documented, and embraced in a way that no other show on this list can claim. He-Man works as the perfect number 1 because he gathers every thread of this list into one hero. He has the body focus of Thundercats, the double life of Gem, the camp of the great villains, and the Filmation legacy. Everything the other 19 shows hinted at, He-Man carries openly all at once in a single champion. Decades later, his icon status has only grown stronger and more openly celebrated. He lives on in memes, in loving tributes, and in the ongoing conversation about queer 80s cartoons. The mild prince who became the most powerful man in the universe became something even bigger than that. So the two promises from the very start of this video are now both fully answered. One cartoon really was confirmed gay by its own creator, and that was the Fussy Skeleton back at number 18. And one cartoon truly became a full-blown gay icon, and that hero is He-Man, standing alone at number 1. These 20 cartoons hid their coding in flowers, mirrors, rainbows, transformations, and secret double lives. For a whole generation with no open representation, those quiet hints were where they first found themselves. Looking back now, the subtext is easy to see, and the shows we loved as children carried far more than we ever knew. Sources: He-Man as a gay icon encyclopedia entry, Gay 80s Cartoons, Gayest Episode Ever Podcast, List of Animated Series with LGBTQ Characters, Super Ted, TV Tropes. BBC brings back Super Ted, The Guardian, July 2014. To all 80s and 90s kids, when there was no LGBT representation, R LGBT. She-Ra was queer in the 80s too. R Princesses of Power.